Let's get back to your argument about American elites, because what you're saying is that their myopia, which comes from their arrogance, from the atavisms left from the Cold War, from their conceptual errors, for example, the enemy is a nation state, it's Iraq, it's not a terrorist group, that all of these things, including, by the way, your argument that they want to put things off because they're focused on their political situation and the electoral process and so on. That all of these things, problems lead our elites to essentially go after the wrong instruments, basically, in dealing with the problem.
I think that's very much the case, sir, and especially the latter. The political process has pervaded everything. There is no discussion of how best to defend America without having two opposing partisan views. There's no united approach to it. And if there's a touch of genius in bin Laden, and I think there is that he's identified U.S. foreign policies as an attack on Islam. And that set of foreign policies is inextricably bound up with American domestic politics. Israel. A martyrdom operation is at hand for any American politician who criticizes Israel or questions the value of the relationship.
You mean political martyrdom.
Political martyrdom. No politician that we've encountered yet has been willing to run on the platform of we need to make sure we're energy self-sufficient, and so prices have to go up. No one in any of the political parties is willing to say, we're going to spend the lives of your sons and daughters so the Saudi government family can continue to steal the profits from their people and put them in banks in Switzerland. So it's a very difficult situation, but we haven't found a politician who's willing to address the issue. And it's not that this is hard to understand, Doctor. If this was rocket science, it wouldn't come from me. This is very apparent. And I've never thought of our politicians as being stupid. They see it as well as I see it, or you see it, or anyone sees it. But they don't have the moral courage to say, listen, to Americans, if you want this war is about what we do. We need, as a nation, as a community, to decide if we want to continue doing this, fine, but this is what it's going to cost. But there's no one out there except Mr. Paul tried to raise it during the campaign, and he was identified as a traitor or an anti-American.
And let's be clear, when you say what we do, you mean not what we're doing here at home, but the policies abroad.
The Islamic, if there's any more insular society than the American society, it's Muslim society. They don't much care what goes on in our country. And in fact, to the extent that they know what's going on, they admire it. The ability of Americans to feed their kids and educate them, find housing, find work, speak their minds. All the polling shows that's admired in the Muslim world. We have an inability to believe, for some reason, that Muslims can make a distinction between Americans and their government. My travels in the Middle East, I think you could ask any intelligence officer, any military officer who traveled in the Middle East, they are invariably welcomed by Muslims. Muslims like Americans. The discussion around the dinner table when they have you to dinner always turns to why is your government supporting Mubarak who's torturing Muslims. But as people, we're not hated. And yet our politicians continue to tell Americans that the Muslim world intends to wipe you out, to force you to convert, to make your daughters wear burqas to grammar school. And that's just nonsense. And it doesn't hurt anyone, sir, but us, because we underestimate the threat of the enemy.
What are the threats that we should be worried about? You talk about that in your book.
I think we should be very worried about an enemy we can't deter. We have spent hundreds of billions of dollars since 9/11. The government in June, through the National Intelligence Estimate, says we haven't beaten al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is stronger than it used to be, and it has more allies. The threat to America, look at our borders. We have let the discussion of border control and immigration control evolve into a discussion of refugee rights and human rights. Well, if we have an enemy we can't deter, and we have open borders, how in the world are we ever going to expect our law enforcement to protect us in this country? But it's another issue that our politicians won't take on. America needs immigrants. My grandparents were immigrants. But there's no reason people can't come in an orderly manner so we can protect ourselves. But the politicians are courting the Hispanic vote, they're courting the free traders, they're the business community who wants cheap labor. None of that protects America.
One of the criticisms that I think one can make against your book and your ideas is
there are probably many, sir.
Yeah, well, let's talk about one, and that is that America is really, at this point in time, probably still the most important global power. And with that global power comes global responsibility and global interests. And some of those interests are manifested through the constraints that are put on us by things like international law, the requirements of international trade, rules about warfare, and so on. So some of this that you sort of associate with kind of do-good values that demonstrate that our leaders have sold out the nation and the national interest. Talk a little about that, because to be fair to our leaders, they're caught between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, the narrow national interests that a middle great power like France or Britain would have, versus those set of interests that a global power has, but the additional ones of global responsibility.
You can be a global power without being an interventionist power. There are things that occur on this earth that may distress us, may upset us, but ultimately have no impact on American interests. What I would argue is that we continue to plod down the road as if we still live in the Cold War era. The Cold War was really a period of extraordinary peace in the world and prosperity. It was a dangerous, terrible situation, but once the Soviets acquired nuclear weapons, there was a standoff, and there was a certain amount of peace. The rules of the Cold War don't apply anymore in all instances. We're certainly not, for example, we don't have the bottomless pit of goodwill that we had during the Cold War. When we were condemning the Soviets and fighting the Soviets, anybody in the Western community could see that, well, the Americans might be pushy and they might be bossy, but at the end of the day, do we want the Red Army in the neighborhood? The answer was no. We're more or less, we're much more alone than we used to be. And we're much more, in my mind, we're much more threatened than we were during the Cold War. This is an enemy, as I said, we can't deter. This is an enemy which we are motivating, and we haven't recognized that yet, or we haven't accepted that. And I personally think that it's a excuse to say, well, we have international agreements, we have this, we have that. We don't have anything unless your country survives. And no country has a right to survive. No, it's not in the Ten Commandments. It's not given by God. You survive if you can. And I think America has to begin to realize that it is a vulnerable country. You know, just take energy. People always fall back when you talk about energy to say, well, it's a fungible commodity, let the market take care of it. Well, we as Americans have frittered away our freedom of making a decision between peace and war on energy. If something happens, not only in the Muslim world, but if something happens in the Gulf of Guinea that stops production, we will go to war to restore it. So I think, you know, there's certainly leftover international regulations, international ideas that you have to cope with. But I think we've lost the idea that the first job of American politicians is not to be citizens of the world, but to be citizens of America.
So I noticed you thanked Pat Buchanan at the beginning of your book. I mean, is that where you come down, or are you not that nationalistic where you take an extreme position about where we should be in the world? Because as I listen to you, you seem to be more moderate than you seem to be in some places in your book.
I think Pat Buchanan had it exactly correct when he said that isolationism is not a philosophy, it's a slur. Americans, since the founding, have created and governed a nation that has been fully involved in the world in terms of commerce and finance, in business, in education, in science. We have never been an isolationist country. We have been a non-interventionist country at our best. But I think that what I am, first of all, is a nationalist. I think it's important to the world, but it's important to America to survive as a viable entity. That our first duty is to ourselves, not to build walls around America, but to make sure that we do the best we can for the American people before we look abroad. No one, least of all me, says we can build a fortress America. You can't do it. But you can pick and choose the issues you need to become involved in.
So what would it take to get our leadership to move in the direction that you're talking? Is it public education? Is it books like this? Is it political leaders who will actually sort of break with what has been the bipartisan foreign policy consensus about the way we should deal with the world?
You know, sir, I think the only thing that's going to do it is another attack in America by Al-Qaeda or a related group that kills tens of thousands of Americans. Because then I think it'll become a grassroots issue. I'm almost of the opinion that it's like the environment. The government basically didn't do much about energy and environment since the first oil embargo 35 years ago. Now we're seeing more and more everyday Americans buying hybrid cars and doing things to take care of the problem, or start to. I think it's got to come from the bottom up. And I don't think that's going to happen until we get attacked again. It's a callous thing to say, but I think it's the truth. Another point you hit on, though, I think is very important. And that is, for being the most educated country on earth, we are perhaps the least educated country on earth. The idea that our leaders should understand Islam and the intricacies of praying and Islamic history, that's important, but you can forgive them for not knowing those things. You can't forgive them for not knowing the history of our country. For Mr. Bush or Mr. Clinton or any of these politicians to think that we can take the American experience, which goes back to when? Runnymede in 1215, 800 years, and put that on a CD-ROM and give it to Mr. Maliki in Iraq or Mr. Karzai in Afghanistan in entirely different societies and say, here, take 6 weeks or 6 months and plug this in, to me, speaks to the ignorance of our governing class, of either ignorance about the American experience or disdain for it. That somehow it was easy for us to get from 1215 to 2008, that there wasn't world wars and civil wars and slavery and segregation. So I think we need a much more appreciative analysis of what America is and how it got to be what it is.
And is that what keeps us from morphing, changing into something else because of the way we misuse the instruments of war and counterterrorism to fight the terrorists?
I think, sir, that somehow we think, because we think somehow that the current American experience just popped up without any kind of work, and it didn't matter that we were an Anglo-American, Old Testament, English-speaking, Greek inheritance country, that we don't realize how we got to where we are. We think we can take our model and put it into a country that has none of that groundwork. Iraq, could Iraq be democratic? Why not? But it can't be democratic like we are until it has a different sort of philosophy, a different sort of religion, a different sort of society. We also have an extraordinarily hard time accepting that in 2008 there's anyone in the world who really believes in God to the extent that they shape every facet of their life according to that belief. We just don't want to admit it. We think it's archaic. We think it's silly. And yet, we have an enemy that's driven by their faith.
You're suggesting that the thing that might turn us around, God forbid, is another attack, and then, but how can we be sure that we won't become worse after such attack, that we will do a kind of a Bush 2 in our response?
Well, it's a very interesting situation, sir, because there's really not much of an opportunity to do a Bush 2.
Yeah.
The one thing that President Bush has ensured is that if we get attacked again, we have absolutely nothing to respond against. Mm-hmm. It's another kind of first.
Well, you mean with or again? Say that again.
If we get attacked again,
yeah,
America will be standing, quivering with rage, with absolutely nothing to hit out against.
I see. No target.
No target that makes any difference. There's targets, but only targets that would make things worse. And that may be a first in world history. That, for example, the greatest power on earth could lose a city to a nuclear device and have absolutely nothing to respond against. I think right now, if it happened in the next 8 months, we'd kick hell out of the Iranians. But after that, there's no target.
I'm curious. You are a person who left the CIA. In some ways, you're a dissenter from American opinion. What have been the costs to you? And have you lost the support of your colleagues who were once in the CIA, or I know you have not used secret sources in any of these publications. It's your ideas and what's in the public domain. But talk a little about that, because you're in Berkeley, and hey, we're about dissent.
Sure, I think the bulk of what I say is boilerplate to the people who work this issue. There's virtually no one in the intelligence community at the working level or the mid-level management who thinks that this war has anything to do with the way we live or what we think. I don't know what the agency thinks of me. All of my work has to be vetted by them before it's published, and I get along very well with the people who do that. And I left, the only cost to me of what I've done is I left a job that I loved. I had no animosity toward the agency when I left. I still think it's the best place to work. I resigned because I thought the 9/11 Commission had hurt America by not finding anyone responsible for anything before 9/11. And I couldn't speak about that from the agency, so I left. So I have no gripes. You know, I think if I could go back to the agency, I'd go back tomorrow.
One last question, a brief answer. How would you advise students who sort of want to be involved in international politics, who want to represent the United States or work for the United States in dealing with the Muslim world?
I think my own view, and it's a terribly biased view, but I think the agency, as I said, is the best place to work in the world. I think it attracts the best and the brightest in America. And it's a job very worth doing, and it's a job that has kind of immediate gratification because it's something that matters every day.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you, Michael, for being here.